Think the Viking cold was brutal for warriors? Now imagine surviving it. As a baby, no voice, no choice, just a tiny body wrapped in wool, lying in a house with no heater. Outside, the winds dropped to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. This is how Viking babies survived the coldest nights of the year without heat. To understand how Viking babies survived winter, you have to understand what they were born into. The Viking longhouse wasn't just a shelter, it was a survival machine. The fire pit in the center didn't just cook food. It smoldered all day and night, radiating heat into the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling. There were no chimneys, just a small hole above to let smoke drift out slowly. This trapped warmth inside like a thermal blanket. The result? A thick layer of smoke hovering near the roof, and a warm, breathable zone near the ground where the family and the baby lived. Yes, it got smoky, especially during windless nights. And no, it wasn't good for your lungs. Babies were especially vulnerable. Today, we know that indoor smoke exposure increases the risk of coughing, infection, and even death in infants. But to the Vikings, it was a brutal trade-off: smoke in the lungs or frost in the blood. Their solution: keep the baby low, but not too low. Viking mothers placed their newborns in low, smoke-kissed cradles, often made of wood and lined with fur. These weren't raised up like royal bassinets. They were intentionally kept close to the floor where the heat collected. Some cradles were built directly above buried firestones, heated rocks pulled from the hearth and wrapped in cloth to provide hours of gentle warmth. And when the baby wasn't in the cradle, they were tucked into the mother's cloak, skin to skin, sharing body heat as nature intended. When it came to dressing babies for survival, Vikings didn't have baby clothes. They had battle gear, in miniature. A newborn Viking child might wear more layers than a modern hiker. First came a soft linen or wool underlayer, if the family could afford it. Then came the wraps. Infants were swaddled tightly in strips of wool cloth designed to trap body heat and reduce heat loss through movement. This wasn't just tradition, it was insulation physics. Each wrap formed an air pocket, and as layers were added, fur, hide, felted wool, those pockets turned into a breathable thermal shell. Some mothers even stuffed dried moss between layers to block drafts. Moss was antimicrobial, absorbent, and naturally insulating. Viking baby fleece before fleece existed. And the outermost layer? A sheepskin cloak, often lanolin-rich and waterproof. It kept the baby dry from sweat, snow, or spilled broth, and helped the warmth stay in, even if damp. To us, it might sound primitive, but thermal tests on reconstructed Viking garments show this swaddling method retained up to 80% of body heat in freezing conditions. Yes, it sounds like a lot of work, but what the Vikings did next to protect their babies might actually surprise you. At night, Viking babies didn't sleep in silence. They slept beside chickens, goats, sometimes even cows. Inside every longhouse, animals and humans shared the same space, not by accident, but by design. A single cow can produce more than 3,000 BTUs of body heat per hour, the equivalent of a small space heater, and Viking families positioned their livestock accordingly. Babies were placed in the warmest zone of the house, just above the animal stalls, but below the rising smoke. This middle layer of air was the sweet spot, humid, warm, and shielded from the worst of the cold. Some families even built sleeping platforms that straddled the line between people and animals, literally warming their infants from below. Historical reconstructions show that the body heat from 4 to 5 animals could raise the indoor temperature by up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, especially when trapped under a thatched sod roof. Add in the heat from siblings, parents, and heavy fur coverings, and that baby wasn't just surviving, it was steaming. Sure, it wasn't glamorous. There were smells, sounds, occasional nudges from a goat, but in the frozen silence of a Viking winter, the herd was more than food or labor. If you think that was intense, wait until you see how the Vikings turned something we take for granted today into a life or death survival strategy. Viking babies didn't just stay warm from the outside, their parents made sure the heat started from the inside out. Breastfeeding was the norm, but in winter, it became a life-saving ritual. Mothers timed feedings to align with the warmest parts of the day, mid-morning and late evening, when the fire had been stoked and the house was thick with heat. And Viking mothers didn't sit away from the fire. They sat near it, letting the baby feed while pressed against their own warm skin under layers of fur. The milk itself was a furnace, high in fat, rich in calories, and full of body-warmed heat. Viking breast milk wasn't just food. It was insulation. Modern studies show that high-fat breast milk can raise an infant's core body temperature by several degrees, especially during cold exposure. And when breast milk wasn't available, they had backups: warm goat's milk, spoon-fed or soaked into soft wool and squeezed drop by drop. Some even warmed milk over coals, never boiling it, just enough to keep the cold from reaching the gut. If you're a parent, you know what sleepless nights feel like, but trust me, that's nothing compared to what comes next. In the Viking Age, sleep was never guaranteed, especially when a newborn was in the room. Winters weren't just long, they were dangerous. A fire that died too early, a sudden cold snap, or a draft through the turf wall could spell disaster before dawn. That's why Viking parents practiced something we now call rotational sleeping. One adult, usually the mother or grandmother, stayed lightly awake through the first part of the night, tending the fire, adjusting bedding, checking the baby's temperature with the back of a hand. Then, midway through the night, the father or elder son would quietly take over, not just to check the fire, but to warm fresh stones and rotate the baby's position if the sleeping area grew cold. Some homes even assigned night warmth duty to older children. Tasks like folding hides tighter around the cradle or spooning in next to the baby for extra body heat. Viking sleep wasn't peaceful. It was a deliberate choreography of survival, where everyone had a role, and one sleepy mistake could cost the newest life in the family. Their alarm clock, a baby's breath turning shallow, a change in skin tone, a firestone that cooled too soon. Because in a Viking winter, someone always had to be listening. Even with watchful eyes and warm arms, the Vikings had one more secret weapon. Viking cradles weren't fancy, but they were masterpieces of survival design. Most were carved from wood, low to the ground, rounded at the bottom, and designed to rock gently with the movement of the house. But the real brilliance was in what went under them. Some cradles were placed directly above buried firestones, slabs of heated rock wrapped in cloth and tucked into pits beneath the cradle platform. As the stones radiated warmth upward, the wooden cradle absorbed and released it slowly, like a medieval space heater. Others were lined with layered insulation: fur, moss, straw, birch bark, and even old scraps of wool clothing. Every material was chosen for its ability to trap air and resist moisture. And then there were the bundle beds, makeshift hammocks of thick cloth suspended near the family sleeping area and wrapped around the baby like a cocoon. These were often hung close to animals or against interior walls where body heat and structural warmth converged. Viking parents didn't have baby monitors. They had placement, proximity, and thermal logic, all built into a cradle that had one job: keep the baby alive until morning. But no matter how warm the cradle was, the real alarm system was the baby's voice. In the Viking world, a baby's cry was never ignored, not just because it meant hunger or discomfort, but because it might signal something far worse: cold. Viking homes were built for survival, not silence. They were one-room spaces filled with family, animals, and constant movement. But amid the noise, one sound rose above all: a baby's cry. Parents trained themselves to hear differences in pitch and tone, knowing the difference between "I'm hungry" and "I'm freezing." If a baby's cry turned weak, hoarse, or slowed, that was a red flag, a sign that warmth was dropping, circulation was failing, or the infant was slipping into danger. And when that happened, you moved. Someone would add firewood. Someone else would lift the baby into their own cloak. Another might adjust the bedding, reposition the cradle, or wrap the infant in fresh furs pulled straight from beside the hearth. No one waited, no one argued, everyone just acted. Because in a Viking winter, crying wasn't a nuisance, it was a survival alert. They didn't need modern thermometers or sleep apps. They had ears, instincts, and the unshakable understanding that a baby's voice was the warmest warning of all. Keeping a Viking baby alive through winter wasn't a routine. It was a full-time mission. It was science, long before science had a name. Because Viking babies didn't just survive, they grew up to become shipbuilders, raiders, farmers, storytellers, explorers. And if you want to see how Viking mothers use tattoos, teeth, and secret rituals to protect their children in death, you'll want to click on this video next. Because the only thing more intense than being born in a Viking winter was being buried in one.